Welcome to the Health Headliner podcast by Tudu Digital. Our content is informational only and not medical advice. Please consult your provider. Now, let's dive into today's headlines.
Okay, let's unpack this. The traditional journey to understanding a chronic illness. Painful diagnosis, managing long-term treatment. It used to begin in a pretty predictable place, a clinical setting, maybe a consultation room, perhaps a pamphlet handed to you by a nurse or, a stack of literature from a specialist. But today, for millions and millions of people, that foundational moment of diagnosis and education happens somewhere completely different, on a short-form video app.
It's a huge shift, a seismic shift, really. And the numbers, they reveal just how pervasive this new reality is. The sources we analyzed for this deep dive, they point to a truly staggering level of reliance on social media for health guidance. Just consider this for a second. A survey that focused on young women aged 18 to 29 found that something like 70% actively go looking for health information on platforms like TikTok.
70%?
Yeah.
That's already significant. But here's I think the really foundational shift that you need to be aware of. 92% of those same people report that they stumble across health information unintentionally. It doesn't matter if they open the app to watch dance challenges or cooking tutorials. The health content finds them. It becomes a foundational and often unsolicited information source.
And what's so fascinating here is that this massive digital migration is happening at the exact same time that we're grappling with these significant gaps in public understanding for chronic inflammatory diseases. For this deep dive, we're focusing specifically on gout, a disease that is, well, it's often misunderstood, often stigmatized, but it represents a massive global health burden.
Gout is essentially a really painful form of inflammatory arthritis. It's triggered when there are chronically high levels of urate in the blood, which causes these tiny urate crystals to deposit in the joints, leading to what sufferers describe as just unimaginable pain during a flare-up.
And this isn't some rare or niche disease. Globally, it's estimated to affect about 41 million people. And on top of that, physicians are diagnosing around 7 million new cases every single year. But despite how common it is, it remains one of the most poorly managed forms of arthritis. Patients often fail to achieve long-term control.
That clinical failure rate, that's the critical backdrop for our deep dive today. We're pulling our insights primarily from a recent and very detailed content analysis published in the journal Rheumatology Advances in Practice. This research, it systematically investigated exactly what kind of advice and information is being spread about gout on, well, the single most influential platform today.
And the clinical reality, which so often fails to penetrate public discourse, is that rheumatology guidelines are incredibly clear. Effective gout management requires long-term urate-lowering therapy, which we'll just refer to as ULT. This isn't just about controlling the odd flare-up. It's about fundamentally changing the patient's urate levels to dissolve those crystals and prevent the disease from progressing.
So our mission today is to unpack this study's purpose, the very clever methodology the researchers use to capture a snapshot of the algorithm, and its, frankly, alarming findings. We want to understand what the public is actually seeing, how accurate that information is compared to evidence-based medicine, and crucially, what the audience's high engagement points tell us about the public's priorities when they're dealing with a painful, long-term condition like this. Okay, let's start with the sheer scale of this digital environment.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, what we're seeing is two parallel failures kind of colliding. First, you have this documented persistent gap in patient awareness and understanding about why long-term therapy is so necessary. And second, you have the massive high-speed information environment of social media. This is the field where that education gap is either finally closed by effective public health messaging, or potentially it gets exploited and amplified by misinformation.
Let's call this section 1, the digital gout ecosystem. We really need to fully appreciate just how universal social media is. We are talking about a landscape where 98% of people aged 12 or older in the areas the study focused on are using these platforms. And it's not just the general population. People with existing health conditions are statistically more likely to engage with and share health information. We're looking at a system where over half, about 52% of people with existing conditions are active sharers. This isn't passive viewing. It's an active, participatory ecosystem that's shaping beliefs.
And within that ecosystem, TikTok is a force multiplier. It has over 1.2 billion users globally. Its reach is just unprecedented, particularly among younger demographics who are increasingly the ones managing the onset of chronic disease. Its whole design, the short videos, the heavy reliance on music, the rapid cuts, it dictates how complex information has to be packaged. And that, right there, is where the danger lies.
So we have this clinically verified disconnect. the failure to manage gout effectively, despite clear guidelines for long-term therapy, and it's meeting this massive, high-speed, algorithmically driven network. The question the researchers were asking is essentially, what happens when these two forces, clinical necessity and viral content, collide?
They needed a way to systematically measure this constantly flowing stream of information. I mean, if you or I search gout on TikTok, we're going to see different things based on our history, right? They had to neutralize that bias.
So how do they do that? How do they manage to get a truly unbiased snapshot of what a new user, maybe a newly diagnosed patient, would see when they first go looking for answers?
They adopted a very systematic search strategy consistent with rigorous digital content analysis. They just searched the single term gout on the TikTok Discover page. But here's the crucial methodological detail. To minimize bias from past activity, they collected the first 200 videos using a brand new, completely clean TikTok account. And they did this all on a single day, December 5, 2024, to make sure the content was captured at the same time.
That's really smart. It completely removes the influence of the personalized algorithm and gives us a much truer picture of the generic information landscape for that search term.
Precisely. And after that initial collection of 200 videos, they had to filter the results. They excluded videos that weren't in English, any duplicates, or videos that were simply not about gout, which left them with 116 relevant videos for the final deep analysis.
116 videos. That sounds like a pretty small, manageable number until you look at the engagement metrics for that content. This is where the sheer velocity of the platform becomes, well, impossible to ignore.
It is absolutely staggering. These 116 analyzed videos, which averaged only 52 seconds in length, so less than a minute each, they collectively garnered a total of 426.6 million views. Just think about the reach here. Nearly 500 million views focused on a relatively niche, though very important, inflammatory disease.
That kind of scale completely changes the definition of health education.
Yeah.
116 pieces of content getting almost 500 million views. That reach means these videos are shaping public beliefs about gout far more effectively than any public health campaign or doctor's pamphlet ever could.
And they also attracted 1.1 million likes and over 343,000 comments. The sheer volume of engagement just underscores that this is a highly active space where people are seeking and sharing information. We should also note that the majority of the content creators they analyzed were US-based. That's about 68% of the content, followed distantly by Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and the Philippines. And that influences the specific context of the remedies and the advice being shared.
That sets the stage perfectly. Almost 500 million views for gout. The reach is just incredible. So now the next logical and vital question is, who are the people commanding that kind of attention, and are they qualified to provide serious medical advice? Let's move to section 2 and investigate the creators. Who is sharing gout advice and why?
Understanding the content creators is really the first step toward evaluating credibility. The researchers broke down the individuals presenting the information into 4 categories. The most prevalent presenters at 27% were actually persons living with gout or close family members sharing their personal stories.
You know, I find that highly relatable. If you're newly diagnosed or suffering from a chronic condition, the first thing you're probably looking for is community. Someone who truly understands the raw, painful reality of what you're going through. You trust a fellow sufferer.
Absolutely. That lived experience, it carries a tremendous amount of weight. Following closely behind were health professionals, who accounted for 24% of the presenters. Then came general members of the public, making up 23%.
Wait, hold on. Only 24% of presenters were health professionals. That seems alarmingly low given the severity and complexity of the disease. What does the study suggest about why professional medical advice isn't dominating this space?
It suggests a fundamental imbalance. It seems to be driven by the algorithm's preference for personal narrative and, frankly, entertainment over clinical rigor. The voices of fellow sufferers and the general public combined, they dominate over 50% of the presenting roles. And here's a really modern category. Artificial intelligence or machine-generated voices presented 15% of the videos.
An AI voice presenting health advice.
Yeah.
That speaks volumes about the digital nature of this environment and the ease with which content can be generated and distributed without any human oversight whatsoever.
But the presenter isn't always the person running the account. What did the analysis reveal about the purpose behind the accounts creating the content?
The primary type of account was individual members of the public, which made up 53%. This is pretty standard for social media, where personal accounts thrive. However, we see a really clear commercial motive here too. Commercial businesses specifically selling products, they accounted for 19% of the accounts analyzed. So we have the human desire for connection on one hand and the commercial imperative for profit on the other, driving nearly three-quarters of the content creation.
Exactly. And while health professionals made up 24% of the accounts, the study found a really significant nuance here. These professional accounts were either providing general advice or, and this is significant, promoting or selling supplements and herbal products, often under the guise of wellness coaching or alternative medicine. The line between professional advice and commerce is severely blurred in this high-speed environment.
Let's talk about the intent of the content itself. If we break down the purpose of those 116 videos, how are they spending their, 52 seconds on average?
The main purpose was clear: providing health advice. That accounted for 38% of the content. This was followed by sharing personal stories, which was 20%, and that ties back to the high number of sufferers as presenters, and then, of course, selling products at 19%. The numbers align perfectly with the creator profile: people sharing experiences, people giving general advice, and businesses selling solutions.
And what about the emotional weight, the tone?
Yeah.
Was this content designed to educate and inform, or was it more sensational or maybe even mocking?
The videos were mostly informative, about 63%, and serious, 37%. But the emotional connotation, it leaned slightly negative, about 36.2% negative compared to 35.3% positive. The negative-leaning videos often depicted severe pain, suffering, and the social embarrassment that can come from debilitating gout flares. They also sometimes used humor to joke about or mock patients' pain and their inability to perform normal daily activities because of the disease.
It's easy to joke about, particularly gout, which carries that historical stigma of being a rich man's disease. But for a chronic sufferer, that mocking tone must be incredibly isolating.
It absolutely reinforces that stigma. Conversely, the positive-leaning videos were often highly hopeful. They were presenting specific strategies, fast-acting remedies, and herbal treatments that claimed to alleviate pain and help patients cope. This dichotomy makes perfect sense for an algorithm, right? Negativity, shock, and relatable suffering, they drive the initial clicks. But hope and a promised immediate solution, they drive clicks and, more importantly, they drive sales.
Okay, so we've established the scale and we know who's talking. Now let's drill down into the advice itself and see where the reality diverges drastically from the science. We are moving now into section 3. Here's where it gets really interesting: the content analysis.
Right. Let's start with how these videos define the problem itself. Approximately 45% of the videos mentioned risk factors for gout. But here's the massive critical finding. 90% of those videos focused overwhelmingly and almost exclusively on diet and lifestyle.
Diet is absolutely central to the public perception of gout. It's the cornerstone of that rich man's disease narrative that has persisted for centuries.
And TikTok acts as an echo chamber for this. It's reinforcing this deeply ingrained, but often dangerously misleading narrative. The study provided a really illustrative quote from one podcaster who described gout as a rich man's disease because it originated with people who eat foods with a wealthier income. You get gout from caviar and meats like steaks. Other videos just hammer home the need to cut back on salt, alcohol, and red meat.
Which, that sounds like decent general health advice. It's advice we hear constantly. We need to pivot now to the critical correction. By focusing so intensely and often exclusively on dietary factors, what evidence-based crucial facts are these viral videos fundamentally missing?
This raises a really important question about the true mechanism of the disease. We need to understand that gout is not primarily a dietary disease. It is fundamentally a metabolic disorder. The sources we reviewed emphasize that while diet and alcohol are known risk factors, they play a surprisingly limited role compared to the underlying physiological factors.
Can you elaborate on that physiological reality for our listener? Why is just avoiding steak and beer not enough to control the disease?
Certainly. The precursors to urate are compounds called purines. And yes, purines are present in the food we eat: red meat, shellfish, organ meats, and alcohol. But the reality is that the vast majority, around 70% of the purines in your body, are produced endogenously. That means they're produced internally via the natural breakdown and recycling of your own cells.
So even if you managed a perfect zero purine diet, which is basically impossible, you're only addressing 30% of the problem at best.
Exactly. Your genetic predisposition, any kidney impairment, and your overall weight play a significantly greater role in influencing your serum urate levels. Gout is overwhelmingly a disease of the kidney's inability to adequately excrete the urate that the body naturally produces. If your kidneys aren't filtering that urate efficiently, which is often a genetic issue, you'll end up with high levels, regardless of how much caviar you avoid.
And the sources highlight that only one single video out of the 116 analyzed accurately discussed this concept of endogenous purine production. This means the vast TikTok information stream is incorrectly portraying gout as a simple consequence of overindulgence or a personal failing, a lack of willpower. And that reinforces that deeply damaging social stigma rather than addressing the complex physiological factors that truly drive the condition.
That's the core misunderstanding that TikTok is currently amplifying. It allows for simple, actionable, though often ineffective advice. Things like, cut out this one food, instead of presenting the complex metabolic reality that requires long-term medication adherence. This approach is highly, highly compatible with the short-form video format.
So let's shift our focus to the supposed solutions. Management strategies were discussed in nearly 80% of the videos. If most of the problem is being attributed to diet, I imagine the solutions are equally focused on these quick dietary fixes rather than clinical long-term care.
Precisely. Dietary advice was, by a wide margin, the single most common form of management. It featured in 53% of the management-related videos. And again, the research clearly states that dietary intervention, while it can be helpful, has very limited long-term effectiveness in maintaining target urate levels when you compare it to evidence-based medical therapy.
And what about the commercial side of things? The supplements and the home remedies, often pushed by those commercial accounts we discussed.
Supplements, herbal remedies, home remedies, they were widespread. They appeared in nearly 40% of management videos. And these were often promoted by videos selling specific products using highly hopeful, very emotive tones. We see illustrative examples in the sources, promoting pills made from pure herbs with no hormones and no side effects, or a video promoting chicory and gardenia tea alongside many other ingredients, all claim to effectively balance urate levels.
The emphasis is always on natural and quick.
And we noted earlier the role of artificial intelligence voices. They were particularly common in promoting these non-clinical herbal treatments. They add this layer of sophisticated, impersonal marketing to often very questionable health claims. The goal is to make the product seem scientific and reliable while completely bypassing the scrutiny that real medical advice has to undergo.
That sets us up for the most concerning part of this entire deep dive. We're moving now from unproven or limited advice to the outright absence of proven evidence-based medicine. Let's call this Section 4, the critical clinical gap in engagement paradox.
This is, I think, the most alarming finding in the entire study. It concerns what they termed the medication blind spot. We know that long-term urate-lowering therapy is the gold standard of care, yet when the researchers analyzed all 116 videos, only 7 discussed any type of medication as a management approach.
7 videos out of 116. That's less than 6% of the content, even touching on medication.
And even those 7 videos, they focused almost exclusively on pain relief options, things like steroids, colchicine, ibuprofen, and naproxen. These are essential for treating the acute flare. They treat the fire, but they do absolutely nothing to remove the fuel.
This is the critical distinction that is being completely lost on the platform. Can you explain the difference for our listener?
Of course. When a patient is experiencing a flare, the joint is acutely inflamed. It's painful, often swollen. Medications like colchicine and non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs are designed to suppress that inflammation and manage the immediate pain. This is crucial for symptom relief. However, they do not address the underlying problem, the presence of excessive urate crystals in the body.
So you feel better, but the disease is still progressing underneath it all.
Exactly. And crucially, only 2 TikTok videos out of the entire 116 analyzed mentioned long-term urate-lowering therapy, or ULT, which is the clinical standard required for chronic management and for preventing permanent joint damage. And only one of those 2 videos even emphasized the importance of having long-term treatment, citing allopurinol as a specific example.
Let's just underscore that statistic again. The standard, proven treatment, the gold standard recommended by rheumatologists worldwide, is virtually invisible. It appears in less than 2% of the content. And it's being compared to this deluge of dietary and herbal suggestions. So what does this all mean for the patient?
It means the patient is being trained by the platform to view gout as a disease of temporary acute flares that you react to with a tea or a painkiller, not as a chronic systemic metabolic disease that requires adherence to medication to prevent permanent damage. If we're talking about what the audience needs to be well informed, they need to know what ULT actually accomplishes.
Yes, let's unpack the physiological goal of urate-lowering therapy.
The goal of ULT, typically involving drugs like allopurinol or febuxostat, is to reduce and maintain the serum urate level consistently below a target threshold. That's usually 6 milligrams per deciliter. This is the level at which the urate crystals can no longer form, and, more importantly, it's the level at which existing crystal deposits start to slowly dissolve over time.
So it's about dissolving the crystals that are causing the damage. It is a therapy designed to cure the chronic condition, not just to treat the symptom.
Precisely. And if a patient relies on TikTok for their information, they might achieve some temporary relief, but they fail to dissolve those crystalline deposits. Over time, those crystals continue to accumulate, leading to increasingly frequent and severe flares, joint destruction, and the development of tophi.
Which brings us to the lack of urgency. The sources also noted a major deficit in content warning people about the severity of untreated gout.
Very, very rarely did these short videos touch on the long-term dangers. Only 8% of the videos mentioned medical sequelae or the serious consequences of untreated gout. When they did, they highlighted tophi, those hard, noticeable crystal deposits in soft tissue or joint damage most frequently. But even more alarming is the almost total lack of discussion surrounding kidney impairment and cardiovascular disease, which are documented major risks associated with chronic, uncontrolled gout.
So the content is overwhelmingly focused on the pain of the moment, and it completely skirts around the risk of organ damage or permanent joint disability.
Yes. The study found a lower comprehensiveness in discussing these complications compared to media analyses on other health topics. The narrative focus is overwhelmingly on the immediate symptom, the painful flare, and the immediate non-medical or commercial solution.
This lack of clinical context leads us directly to the engagement paradox, which is perhaps the most insightful behavioral finding of the entire study. The audience, through their clicks and their shares, is effectively voting on what kind of information they want to see, and they are actively avoiding the scary facts.
That's absolutely right. The researchers meticulously compared the engagement metrics, views, likes, comments, shares, and bookmarks across all the different content categories. And the finding is a clear rejection of complexity and long-term risk.
So tell us about this disengagement with seriousness.
They found that videos discussing the severe medical consequences of untreated gout, like the risk of kidney impairment or cardiovascular disease, had significantly lower engagement scores. Across the board, people are literally scrolling past the potential for long-term organ damage.
Why do you think that happens? Is it simple denial, or is there a psychological factor at play, maybe compounded by the platform's design?
It's likely a complex mix of both. Psychologically, humans often exhibit an avoidance mechanism when we're confronted with frightening, chronic health risks that require long-term behavioral change. It's just much easier to focus on a hopeful, immediate fix. And the algorithmic component magnifies this. TikTok's design rewards content that is simple, entertaining, and quickly consumable. A 52-second video explaining the slow, cumulative damage of urate crystals is fundamentally less engaging than a video showing a miraculous tea or a simple dietary change that promises immediate relief.
And in sharp contrast to this avoidance of the scary facts, what kind of content were the audiences rushing to engage with?
The videos containing gout management strategies, especially the ones promoting quick fixes and supplements, had significantly higher engagement, particularly in shares and bookmarks. This implies a really powerful user preference. Audiences prefer immediate, practical advice that's perceived as relevant to immediate symptom control and relief, rather than content highlighting long-term, complex risks that require clinical intervention and adherence.
This must present a massive headache for health communicators who are trying to leverage these platforms for good. I mean, you can create a clinically perfect, evidence-based video explaining why allopurinol is necessary to prevent joint destruction. But the algorithm ensures that the video promoting a magical herbal tea gets 10,000 times the attention.
It's a crisis of communication effectiveness. The core clinical solution, long-term urate-lowering therapy, it's not inherently entertaining. It involves commitment. It requires dealing with a healthcare system, and it doesn't offer that hopeful, immediate remedy promised by a lot of the supplement content. Clinicians have to find a way to bridge that gap.
Let's move to Section 5 and discuss the implications, limitations, and expert conclusions drawn by the study authors. First, what are the serious public health implications of this overwhelming focus on diet and quick fixes drowning out the clinical reality?
The primary implication is that the current content may severely mislead the public. It reinforces the destructive idea that gout is merely a personal choice issue based solely on diet and lifestyle. This completely ignores the major roles of genetics, kidney function, and metabolism, which is that 70% we talked about. By doing this, it completely overshadows the proven effectiveness and the clinical necessity of long-term urate-lowering therapy.
Essentially, patients who follow this trending advice might manage their diet perfectly, feel virtuous for doing so, and yet still fail to control their urate levels. And that leads to disease progression and severe medical consequences because they never started or adhered to the correct medication. It actively contributes to the poor disease control we identified at the very start of this deep dive.
And furthermore, the societal implication of this pervasive focus on diet is the reinforcement of stigma. When gout is portrayed as self-inflicted, a consequence of eating too much steak or drinking too much, patients are often reluctant to seek the clinical care, especially the long-term medication, that they truly need. They may feel they should be able to fix it themselves through willpower and diet alone.
It creates a moral barrier to effective medicine. But we must also address the constraints of the research to make sure we have a balanced view of its findings. What were the study's built-in limitations?
The researchers were very clear about the constraints they faced in analyzing such a dynamic platform. First, this was a cross-sectional design. They took a single snapshot on one day. Therefore, they can't make causal inferences. They can't say that watching a specific video caused a person to stop taking their medication, only that the content exists and has massive reach.
They captured the content ecosystem, but not the behavioral outcome.
Correct. Second, they only used one simple search term, gout. This means they might have missed relevant videos tagged under other related, perhaps more viral, terms like uric acid or sore big toe. And finally, the analysis was strictly limited to English language videos, and the majority of creators were based in the US. This limits the immediate generalizability of the findings to a global, multilingual platform where the scale of misinformation could be even greater.
But despite those limitations, the findings highlight a clear, urgent opportunity for the medical community to intervene. What was the critical takeaway from the lead researchers themselves?
The perspective of the lead author, Samuel Ofanoa, was not entirely negative. They recognized the power of the platform, stating that TikTok has great potential as a tool to raise awareness around health issues such as gout and promote information that aligns with clinical guidelines. The key takeaway is the need for health professionals and organizations to actively seize the opportunity.
So they need to realize that avoiding the platform means they concede the field entirely to misinformation and commercial interests.
Exactly. The solution isn't to try and shut down the personal story content, which is valuable for community, but to actively compete with it. They have to develop a targeted health communication approach that prioritizes the dissemination of accurate, evidence-based information on long-term gout management through the very platforms where patients are already looking for answers. The challenge is synthesizing serious scientific findings, like the mechanism of allopurinol and the target serum urate level, into the short, entertaining, and hopeful formats that audiences clearly prefer.
That brings us to our synthesis and our final thoughts. This deep dive has shown us that social media is, well, it's undeniably the primary venue for many people seeking health information, including those suffering from chronic diseases like gout.
And we found a major, potentially life-threatening disconnect. The sheer volumes of personal stories and commercial remedies, heavily focused on the limited effectiveness of diet and lifestyle changes, is absolutely drowning out the critical, evidence-based medical advice regarding long-term urate-lowering therapy. The fact that the gold standard treatment for gout is virtually invisible on the platform is a crisis in health communication and a driver of poor long-term patient outcomes.
So our call to action for you, the listener, is clear. Be a fiercely critical consumer of health content, particularly short-form videos. Be highly skeptical of content that emphasizes quick fixes, single dietary exclusions, or supplements over the complex long-term treatments recommended by established medical guidelines. When a solution is presented as simple, quick, and natural, check to see if that simplicity is masking a serious clinical gap, a gap that could be filled by proven medication like urate-lowering therapy.
And this leaves us with a final provocative thought to consider the next time a health video pops up on your feed. We have seen clear evidence that audiences are strongly drawn to practical management tips, how to cope right now with a flare, but they actively shy away from the serious, often scary facts about long-term medical consequences like kidney failure or joint destruction. This highlights a fundamental challenge for health communicators in the digital age. How do you effectively synthesize the seriousness of a chronic disease and the necessity of long-term adherence into a format that is intrinsically designed and algorithmically rewarded for short-term entertainment and high, rapid engagement? The content that saves your life is often the least entertaining.
Thanks for tuning in to the Health Headliner podcast by To Digital. Like and subscribe for more health news and breakthroughs. Stay healthy and informed. See you next time.